Well, good morning. Good to see everybody here today. So glad you're able to make it to one of the Sunday morning gatherings of Crossway Church. As Stacy mentioned earlier, just a few minutes ago, we are in the third week of a sermon series that we are doing entitled Stretch Thin. And in this sermon series, what we're doing is we're talking about mental health and mental health related issues. And so for the first 2 weeks, we did some teaching where we talked about the two most common mental health related struggles that people face in the United States of America today. We talked about anxiety in week 1. In week 2, we talked about depression. And today, I thought it would be really healthy for us if we shifted gears and we did something maybe a little bit different than what we've been doing the first 2 weeks. And James, the writer of James, tells us this. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, take note of this." In other words, what he says is, guys, you need to make sure you do whatever you do to not forget what I'm about to tell you, because what I'm about to tell you is really important. So pull out a pen, pull out a piece of paper, write it down, put it on your mirror at home, put it in your dashboard in your car, do whatever you have to do. He says, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak. And so today, we're going to do something a little bit different. Rather than me standing up here talking about Scripture and teaching you about what it means and maybe showing you something you had never seen or thought about before, what we're going to do today is we are going to practice what we've already been told. Today, as a church family, we are going to be quick to listen and slow to speak. Joining me on the stage today are a group of people who either have been or are currently in the middle of a mental health related struggle. And before I get them to introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about what their struggle is, I want to say that I really appreciate the courage that it takes for the people who are on the stage with me to be on the stage with me today talking about this subject. Kelly on the end there said yes to me, then she said no to me, and then she said yes to me. And last night, if she could have said no to me, she probably would have said no to me. Colton, this is going to be the first time. This is the first time where he's been public, really public about his struggle. And she's going to tell you in a few minutes, but she struggles with anxiety-related issues. And what she's doing today is going to probably create more of those for her. And then on the end, Missy's just unfortunately my sister, so she's been dealing with mental health struggles her whole life.
You're my struggle.
Yeah, I am your struggle. But I'm really glad that they're here, because it really does take courage to do what they're doing today. And I hope that you will be quick to listen and slow to speak. Try to understand their world. And our hope is that by kind of tearing off the face of this subject in a very transparent sort of way with you, that we offer you some help and hope in the area of mental health related struggles. So let me start at the end there. Missy, tell us a little bit, introduce yourself, and then tell us a little bit about your struggle.
Okay, I'm Melissa Valerga. He calls me Missy. And today I really want to talk to you guys about a 10-year struggle with eating disorders. And that really began my sophomore year in college. My freshman year, I had gained some weight, as sometimes people do during those life changes. And I was really unsatisfied with a number of things, my weight included. But that set the stage because I had a conversation with a gentleman who was very fitness-oriented, and he was kind to me, but he just shared with me how he cut weight. And so I took his advice, which was not very good advice, and I tried an experiment. And that became an obsession. And so for a number of years following that, I starved myself. And so I started with anorexia, which scared my family to death. And they didn't know what to do about it. And then at some point, I could no longer maintain that. I don't know what snapped inside of me, but that transitioned into binge eating. It was almost like a compensatory thing that I could no longer not eat, so I ate everything in sight. And I tried to compensate with purging that through laxatives and over-exercising. And then in the latter stages of that, I actually just ended with just binge eating, consuming exorbitant amounts of food in secret and in hiding all at one time.
I'm Ann Mayo, and I have had anxiety since I was 4 years old. And throughout my childhood, I would obsess over fire, so I would check all the outlets in my house every night and make sure nothing was around them that could cause a fire, things like that. I was obsessed with tornadoes and losing my everything. And it progressed until I was about 16, and I had the Left Behind books came out, and I was terrified that the rapture was going to happen, and I was not going to be going. And I obsessed over this to an insane degree. And my mother was the best person that I knew, and I thought, she's for sure going. So if I can just check on where she is, if she's still here, then I didn't miss it. Or I would turn on the news and make sure it hadn't happened. And it sounds, for me to say it right now, it sounds really silly, but it was terrifying. And in the middle of it, that's all I could think of. And finally, my mom realized what was going on, and I went to a doctor and got on medication that the medication was able to break those cycles of just obsessively thinking about this. So I would think about it, but then it would go away, and I didn't think about it for hours and hours and days.
Yeah, my name's Colton. Unlike Ann, mine came at a season of my life about 2 to 3 years ago, anxiety and depression. And as a matter of fact, I was an individual that I will let you know, like before this happened, I didn't quite understand depression, and I didn't quite understand anxiety until it hit me like a freight train in the middle of nowhere. It all came in a season where I was highly stressed. A lot of good things and bad things all piled on top of each other that felt like weight on my shoulders that I could not quite grasp, and it's something that I've sort of been dealing with off and on in seasons ever since then. So.
My name's Kelly, and my struggle is fairly recent, probably in the last 18 months or so. I just a series of probably stresses and events that happens. I have like low-level anxiety, really anxiety about really strange things. I can't stand traveling. Just lots of anxiety around not being at home with my people, but then that kind of led to depression. So a little over a year ago, I started to see a therapist because I was encouraged by friends and family to go. I would just cry all day long, pretty much, and sleep a lot, not want to get out of my bed. And it led to then going to see a primary care physician this past spring. It got so bad, and I started on antidepressants about 6 months ago.
Yeah. So what I've picked up from friends and family that struggle with mental health related issues is that there are peaks and valleys with the whole thing. So tell us for a few minutes, if you don't mind, and I really appreciate your level of transparency, guys. Tell us about one of your low moments.
I'll share. And I really just want to frame this for you guys that when dealing with eating disorders, you're basically dealing with addictions. But one of my lowest moments for myself was during the binge eating phase in the latter portion. I used to work as a counselor at a Christian camp. And one summer, I remember having my girls, and they would serve them food, and then they would send them for free time, so the counselors would have free time also. And after one lunch, I remember they threw away this tray of chocolate chip cookies, and I, seeing that, decided to jump into the dumpster to retrieve those chocolate chip cookies because I just needed a fix. And so I remember finding them in the dumpster that I was in, pulling hair off of the food, pulling dirt specks off, and then just shoving it in my mouth as fast as I could. And I remember being nervous about getting caught getting in the dumpster. How could I even explain that? Or even getting out of the dumpster. And I just remember thinking to myself, how did I get here?
So despite going on medication at 16, which I've been on most of my life now, there's still low moments, right? It doesn't solve everything. And when I had my oldest child, I went off medication during pregnancy and didn't go back on it. And sometime after he was born, I started to have anxiety again, and this time it was about the weather. And the lowest part was when I was in the middle of my living room floor, 2 in the morning, curled up in the fetal position, just like sobbing and thinking about all the bad things that could happen from the weather, because it was raining outside. And my husband was just like, I don't know what to do. And I was a non-functional person, and I couldn't be a wife or a mother or myself. And that was when we were like, okay, time to go back on medication. And
Yeah, so mine started off with small signs. I started questioning decisions that I was making, some things that I was doing, and then I would start having panic attacks in the office and at my house in the living room. I didn't know what that was. Actually, at the time, I thought maybe I was drinking too much caffeine or something, honestly.
Which you do.
Which
Yeah,
you do.
sometimes I do. That is a true story. Because I had never experienced anything like a panic attack before. Yeah. And then as things progressed, so to give you a little background, which I should have answered in the first story, this is in the moment where I made a big career change here at the church. This is the moment where we started a campaign for a student building. That was a really big deal, and I found out that my wife and I were pregnant, and a lot of those are actually really, really good things, and there were some other negative things on top of all that. And so all of this stuff started slowly progressing to the point where it was no longer just me questioning myself and having these panic attacks, but my whole daily routine and pattern changed. I couldn't fall asleep at night, and when I finally did, I couldn't wake up in the morning. I was a drag. I did not want to go into work, which is abnormal for me. I used to be a gym rat, and I immediately stopped going to the gym and taking care of my body like I did. And matter of fact, that's still something that I struggle with up to the day.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My low point was probably this past spring when I knew, that my therapist had told me that I was moderately depressed, and I was going to therapy every 2 weeks, and just things weren't getting better. Actually were kind of getting worse, and I would just sleep all day. When I would get up, I just didn't want to come into work. And I don't know if you've ever been there where you feel like you have to almost physically pick your arm up to do something because you just don't, your brain is just telling you just don't want to do it. And so I remember a Tuesday, because we have meetings on Tuesday, and I basically had to will myself to get dressed, to get up here, and then I drove into the parking lot, and I probably sat in my car for 30 minutes before I could will myself to get out of my car. I'm just crying the whole time, just don't understand why I feel this way. And I got in here, and I immediately left as soon as I could be done, and I knew at that point that I needed to go see a doctor. And so in that moment, there was some kind of clarity in that spot, and I called and made an appointment, but it was 2 days away. And so I can't tell you how many times in those 2 days that I was like, I could just cancel it. I'm fine. There's no need for me to go in. I'm stronger than this. I don't need to do this. And but I made it there, and it's been better ever since.
Yeah, so for the 4 of you up here, 3 of you, I've been walking with you to some degree. And when I asked about your low point, there's a part of me that wondered, well, what was my low point? Because when you walk through something, there are people that are connected to you, people that care about you. And the low point for me was, for each of you that I've walked through this with, has been that moment when I realized I can't fix this. That no matter how much I want to, no matter how much I would give to be able to make your reality different, I couldn't. And that was a hard, hard moment. But in those moments, I think we all have those with people who we love. We want to make sure that we do something, anything sometimes, that will be helpful. So for a minute, let me ask this question. What along the way as you struggled, what have been some things that Christians, and I'm going to get Colton, you to start this one, what have been some things that Christians have done, or maybe people in general, that have been harmful?
Yeah, not just an answer for believers, but an answer for everyone, is assuming who does struggle with depression and assuming who doesn't struggle with depression. My assumption of everyone out here that knows me well and doesn't know my story is that it's a surprise to see me up here. Because I've actually very much sheltered this part of my life, which if you know me well, I don't shelter anything that's part of my life. I'm a very outgoing, very open individual.
Now
I'm
you
one of
have
those
all
people.
these people who are on
this
your
verse,
team now.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, I know. You're all my bubble now. I'm one of those people, like that verse that we talked about at the beginning of this message. Like, I really have to focus on that because I talk a lot more before I think and process. But this is just one of those things that I've always kept in a very small circle of people. And what I can almost guarantee is that there are other people in this room right now that also struggle with some sort of depression or anxiety, that aren't as open about it as someone else. And so being very cautious and careful how you communicate to people, because you don't always know their entire story.
Yeah, I think in one of the other, maybe last service, somebody said, just because somebody's smiling doesn't mean they're okay.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So somebody else, what have Christians done that maybe, or people in general that might have been harmful for you?
I don't, maybe on top of the assumption of who has it or doesn't have it, the assumption of what the core issues or what the root of that is. You know, I remember for myself, some people thinking that it was just me being vain. And, you know, that may have been one small piece of the picture, but it certainly wasn't the entirety once it blossomed into something much bigger, you know. So I think just the assumptions that are made.
Yeah, sounds like we're talking about assumptions about who is or isn't struggling and why they are struggling. Yeah. So let's talk about the other side of it, though. What are some things that some Christians have done along the way where they sort of breathed life or hope into you? Something that they did that was helpful.
I'll start. So one of the things that they've talked about the last couple weeks is really just having a community of people that surround you, that support you, and they'll speak truth into you, and they encourage you. And they may not try to fix you, they don't judge you. It's those people that you need around you that are going to be there to support you and help you in those moments where you are spiraling out of control. And I have a particular story with this. I led a small group this past spring called Preach to Yourself. It's a book by Haley Morgan. It's really good, but it talks about the negative rhetoric that we have in our heads, the loops that we start. So one of my huge problems is I constantly tell myself that I'm not good enough and that I can't do this. And so when I started taking the antidepressants this past spring, I did it, and a couple months in, every night I would go to bed and I would take this pill. And so one night I looked at my hand and looked at the pill and about had a meltdown because I thought, oh, how did it ever get so bad? Like, how did it ever get here? How am I not strong enough? What's wrong with me, essentially, is where I led my thoughts. This is 11 o'clock at night, and I'm basically freaking out. And in the book, it talks about sending an SOS signal to people who can speak truth and be an encouragement. And the SOS signal that I send, that she said in this book, was one of the red balloon emojis. So it's just real simple. On your phone, there's a red balloon emoji. And so I have a couple friends, and I sent them that emoji at 11 o'clock at night, and I basically word vomited. Like, what happened? Why am I here? What is going on? Like, I don't know why I'm taking this. Maybe I need to stop it. Like, all the thoughts that were going in my head. And they did not. They knew what I was going through in that moment. And so they were able to kind of go, okay, take a deep breath. You are good enough. You are worthy enough. And they were able to speak that truth back into me. But just really finding something that works for you, finding that community of people that's able to kind of step in and hold you up and encourage you and not try to fix you all the time, but just really be there as a comfort when you have those moments.
Yeah. What about you, Colton? I'm sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to add to that I think something that was very helpful was somebody who could model health for me and not jump into the crisis with me, but just be a reflection of what was possible, of what a normal life would look like. So to let me walk alongside them and for them to be steadfast in who they were and in, you know, just solid.
The question is, what can people do to help you? Yeah. So you were part of part of my small circle. Terry White was part of my small circle of people that I led into the world that I was in. And one of the things that helped me most is not them coming in my office and telling me what I need to do, but coming in my office and asking me how I'm doing. Just the constant checkup and allowing. So another little piece of my moment was I had no idea what was causing my anxiety and my depression in the moment. I can look back at it now and understand. But in that moment, I had no clue. My body was a mess. I was emotionally a mess, and I didn't know why. And every time they'd come in my office and ask me how I was doing, it allowed me to sit there and process what was going on in my life, that they could kind of help me have some dialogue and conversation back and forth. I think you said earlier, it was first service, you're like, I want to fix the problem, and we can't fix the problem. That's not the advice I would give, but constantly checking on the people that are struggling with this. In my story, it really helped me.
Yeah. So this is kind of connected to what we just said, but what advice would you give to somebody who's struggling with a mental health issue? Statistically, at least close to 50% of us are right now. So what advice would you give to somebody who's struggling with a mental health issue?
I would say to get help.
Yeah.
Because, I had somebody even say to me, how can you be struggling with this? You're in school to be a therapist. And I really thought that I should get through it alone, and probably if I had gone to see somebody who could help me, somebody who wouldn't also be affected by my struggle, then it probably wouldn't have needed to be 10 years. It could have been a lot less of a process.
Yeah.
You guys talked a little bit about focusing our thoughts the last couple weeks and focusing on things to be grateful for and thankful for. And so one of the things that I like to do, I would get stuck in that negative, like, I can't do this, I'm not worthy enough, I'm all this over and over and over again in my head. And I would, instead of, and I got this from that same book, I would tack on to the end of that statement, I can't do this without you, God.
Yes.
And so I would tack that on to the end of those thoughts and start adding that to the end of my thoughts. And instead of me finishing on this very self-focused, I can't do this, it then becomes, I can't do this without you, God. And I need you here to pick me up, wrap your arms around me, and help me through this. And so just by simply, if you're struggling with something like that, try to add God to that equation in those thoughts. It helps.
You guys, anybody want to add to that? No? Okay, so what advice would you give to somebody who knows somebody who's struggling, who's like me, who has people that they care about that are in the middle of it?
Yeah, I can sort of speak to that a little bit. So despite being somebody who's had anxiety their entire life, I have a lot of people in my life that have anxiety. It's sort of multi-generational in my family. And I find it difficult to not get frustrated and not get impatient when somebody that I know has anxiety. And so if it's hard for me to not get impatient and frustrated, it's really hard for somebody who doesn't understand anxiety and depression to not feel that way. And so you really have to take a step back and realize that this person does not have anxiety and depression to hurt you. They aren't doing it on purpose. They didn't make this choice. This is just where they are, and they just need you to listen and do some of the other things that people are going to suggest. But that's the first thing, was just, to me, like, step back and realize that this is not about you. They are in the middle of it, and that's a super hard thing to say because I am not good at it either, but that would be my...
Yeah, I think in the first service, we said this in the first service, this came out, that I want to make sure we kind of talk about here. So when you mentioned listening, earlier somebody in the first service mentioned the power of asking questions.
Yeah.
Right.
Was that you, Kelly?
Yeah. So one of the things I think is really good, I had a friend that recently just struggled with postpartum depression. And so one of the things I got her to do, because she felt like she was in the middle of this, and she first didn't want to claim it for what it was. And I was like, no, this is what you're going through, and it's okay. You just have really to say it. And then I had her kind of filter her thoughts through some things like, okay, so are your thoughts, is that grounded in Scripture? Would God condemn you Would God cause confusion for you? Probably not. And so instead of me trying to fix her, right, I was making her then go, okay, let me process my thoughts through these questions. And she was able to kind of come to her own conclusions, which is really, when you're on that side, you need to do. Because if you can't get yourself out of that by, somebody helping you, then, that's kind of counterproductive.
Yeah. When I was in college, I had a professor who used to say, accusations close the spirit, but questions prick the conscience. That was kind of his way of saying there's something truly powerful about a well-worded, sincere question. God can do some work with that. And I think part of what I want to make sure we point out today is part of being a really good friend, because that's kind of what we said too, don't be a fixer, be a friend, is to, if you know somebody who's struggling, ask them questions, help them unpack it. There's something about that helps them.
Right, because for her, it was like, would God cause you to fear? Would God cause you to feel alone, right? No, right? Those things are not, he's probably encouraging you to go seek him out. And so she was able to kind of come to those conclusions on her own.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I think that listening does is it allows that other person to get those thoughts out of their head and work through them. Because
verbalize them, yeah.
when it's in your head, it just goes into crazy places. I mean, it goes into dark places. And when you start speaking it out loud to somebody else, you start to be able to go, oh, wait a minute. And you almost hear yourself, whereas before you didn't hear your own self. So I think being just there to listen and ask those questions allows somebody to work through their own.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because that's what happens to me in therapy a lot, right? So like I'm spouting out all this stuff, and he was like, asked me a question, and I'm like, okay, I get it now. Like, when I hear it out loud and then process it through the question that he asked me, I'm most of the time like, all right, I got you, yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes hearing people reflect back what you've said makes it contained more easily to identify and manageable somehow when you hear it spoken back as well.
Yeah.
But I also would suggest that if you're somebody who is supporting somebody with mental illness, then you need to get support. I always say supporters need support, and because you're going to be affected by it, and you're going to need someone to be giving you strength. And so it's important that you make sure that you're taken care of well as well.
Yeah, I can speak to the power of that because with Kelly and Colton, I kind of walked through this with them. And until earlier this year, you were living in Miami, Florida, and so you didn't know them. You didn't know them from Adam. And sometimes we'd have conversations, I would with them, and then I'd call you up and go, all right, counselor, I need some help because I'm not sure if this is right. I'm not sure if I'm helping. Maybe I'm making a big mess of this thing. And man, it was just so helpful. Sometimes you're like, I might want to adjust that, or man, I think you're onto something. Man, that was really a powerful thing. Supporters really need support. Yeah. Anything else you guys want to add on that front? What advice would you give to someone who knows somebody struggling? Anything else? All right, let's move on to the next question. So in the mix of all of this is your faith, right? So how has your faith impacted your struggle?
I can answer that. So my struggle came down to a high amount of stress and questioning my self-worth. And in the process, I always know where I start. I always start asking myself questions about people and how people think of me. And so I'll sit there and I'll think, am I worth this? Do they value me? Do they love me? Do they support me? And what I know at the surface is people are fickle, and that it doesn't really matter. And so what my faith allowed me to do is finally come to the question was, well, what does God think? Does God value me? Does God have a purpose for me? In this mess, in this muddiness, is there another side of this where I'll see like what it is that he's working on in me and what he's working through me. Yeah. And so I am so happy that in the middle of everything that I've gone through, I've been able to land on that question. Even though sometimes it takes me a long time to get there, I can still get there. And finally ask that question that I have faith and I know the answer to.
Right, that's good. Yeah, somebody else, how has your faith impacted your struggle?
Well, my struggle was a lot born of maladaptive coping skills. And so I learned that in relationship with Jesus, I could find comfort, which was what I needed a lot. I could find a reprieve from the things that were troubling me and would drive me to want to control things in my life. I could find a sense of significance there. I could find purpose. I could find whatever. There were so many things I was trying to find that could only be found in relationship with God. And, I also discovered there that Jesus cared to be my rescuer. He cared to be my savior in those moments. And he wasn't just trying to rescue me for heaven, but that it was for now. And so I learned that he cared very much about my struggles and that he was deeply personal and in those moments with me.
Mine is kind of similar to that. So I always wanted to get myself out of it, right? Because I'm like, I'm strong, I'm here, I'm gonna get myself out. And I did that for a while just because I thought that was the solution. But then what I realized, I read a book called The Radiant Midnight by Melissa Mayomi. And she talks about the dark places and the fact that, God's still there in those places. And he actually, if you just look for him, you can find him. And just instead of trying to struggle and claw your way back out of it, maybe ask God what you are supposed to learn there. And I feel like in my in and out time with depression, as I go on this roller coaster constantly, it seems like I've actually discovered a different side of God than I've ever experienced before. And so it's been almost, the last time, which is fairly recent, that I entered into depression, I didn't fight against it. I was like, okay, God, what do you want to teach me here? Like, what do you expect me to learn here? And that's easier said than done because I don't want to be there. Like, that's the last place I want to be. Is I want to be in this place where I'm crying at the drop of a hat. Every song is emotional for me. Like, I don't want to be there. But then I thought, I need to figure out what God's going to teach me here.
Go ahead, Ann.
I have a messier answer than that.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sharing it because I feel like I'm probably not the only person with maybe this answer. So, obviously my struggle for a while was very based in religion, and it actually sent me away for a while. I ran away from God for a while. Even when I came back, and even with a strong faith, I'm still, my faith is still impacted all the time by my struggle because there are verses that I can't read or I am going to have a panic attack. And I have to be real intentional about what I read, or if I'm going to tackle those things, that I'm not doing it alone, that I maybe have a friend in that Bible study with me because it is going to be hard to get through. But my faith sometimes has made my struggle better. I mean, those moments when I was on the floor crying, I was usually actually listening to worship music and like begging God to get me out of it. So I wasn't away from him. But at the same time, that struggle's kind of, there's a barrier sometimes, I think, that I have to intentionally try to cross. And so it's not as easy as like, I learned this thing and now everything's great. It's always a struggle.
And I like the transparency of that answer too, because one of the things that we said in the very beginning of our study, our series, is look, when it comes to mental health and mental health related issues, we just don't believe in quick fixes. We don't believe in silver bullets. We don't believe in formulas. It's complex.
Right.
And it's complicated. And your experience is almost certainly somebody else's experience as well. So let me ask, almost like the other side of that same thing. So, but how has your mental health struggle shaped your faith? Not how has your faith been impacted by your struggle, but how has your mental health struggle shaped your faith?
Well, I think that for me, it gave my faith a fortitude because while I did learn that Jesus cared about my feelings and my struggles, I also learned that there was going to be a number of things that I had to do that were the right things to do. And I was going to need to do them whether I felt like it or not. and my distorted thinking and my chaotic feelings weren't going to lead me there. And so I have learned that in doing life with Jesus, that is also the case, that there's a lot of right things. Maybe you don't wake up and feel like going to church. Maybe you don't feel like forgiving someone. Maybe you don't feel like being kind. And yet you should, because it's the right thing to do. And so I would say that it has given me a sort of bedrock firmness in my faith and what that looks like to live that out.
Yeah, it's a much more buoyant, firm faith, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, mine's about trust. Trust has been kind of like my theme, like lately, just because I like control. Like, I like to be in control of things. I like to know what's going to happen. Like Sunday mornings, I like to have it planned to a T.
Wait, you like control?
I like control
No.
a lot. Like,
No.
I like to know what to.
You said that, and it passed by, and I came back to it.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
I like control. Like, I like to know what to expect. I mean, even with my family, I like everything to be planned just so. And so this has taught me that, I have to trust in God. Proverbs 3:5-6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not onto your own understanding, like not my own, but yours, God. And so I have to continuously remember that it's his plan. I have a purpose. He has a purpose for me. And it is not about my own time. He will tell me when things are going to happen. And I have to be okay with that. And that's really, really hard, but it's something that I've learned over this, because if I could snap my fingers and get out of my depression, I would. I would never, ever ask it to come back. But he has a purpose with it, and there's going to be something that I can use from it.
Yeah. So we're running out of time, so let me jump to the next question. We could unpack that further, but let me just jump to the next question. Finish the sentence. I wish Christians knew blank about my struggle.
That, and I touched on this earlier, but that this is not a choice that anybody would choose. It is oftentimes very, very much out of, at least for me, out of my control. And as much as I'm in the middle of it, wanting to get out of it, it's not happening. And that, like I said earlier, I'm not doing it to hurt anybody, and I'm not trying to make anybody's life harder. This is just my reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, for me, I think it would be that the solution is not simple. It was never to eat or not eat. And so just those oversimplifications can be damaging or destructive. But, I would want you to, even more than that, know that while you may not have the right answer or the perfect solution, you do have something you can do to help. And your prayers are effective. Scripture says that the effective prayers of a righteous man accomplish much. And I know that my dad and my mom prayed for me regularly when they didn't know what to do. I know that my brother did, and many other people. And through their prayers, God was accomplishing something in me and through me that only he could do, because nobody else knew the way, not even myself. But he worked that healing through their prayers.
Yeah, which leads me to the last question. If you were to ask our church family to pray for you guys about something specific regarding the struggle that you find yourself, or maybe you found yourself in, what would you ask them to pray for you about?
Oh, everybody's looking at me.
Kelly.
Everybody's like, Kelly.
Yeah, just to allow us, for me, it's all about trusting and all about focusing our thoughts and asking God that in those moments that we're able to discern the voice of him and the voice of the enemy. Because a lot of times what happens when that negative rhetoric starts, we get stuck, and it's hard sometimes to discern who's who. And so just helping us to focus and just lean and trust in God's plan and his timing and his purpose for each of our lives.
Ditto.
I feel like that's like a cheat answer. Like
I mean,
you just looked at her homework and copied her homework.
I can reword what she just said.
No, okay, that works.
Good.
Wow.
That was a good one. That's That's
Yeah.
exactly what I would
How
have
about
said.
you guys? What would you ask people to pray for?
I would ask, not just for me, for anybody with mental health, that you just pray for a peace in their mind, because there are just so many times where even a few seconds of peace breaks that cycle, or it lets you see or hear God's voice more clearly. And there's a lot going on, so peace is real important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mine is really a reworking of Kelly's with a twist, but I think just that God would help us to see and celebrate his design, that we could love his purposes above our own. We could love his thoughts above our own, and really just submit to them, because I find that's the hard part. If you can see it, then to say, okay, if this is what you want, Lord, then okay, let it be done to me.
Yeah.
And that's easier said than done.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
yes.
absolutely. Hey, let me just say, as I kind of wind this part of our time together up, once again, I want to thank you guys. I know that coming up here and going public with this, and the fact that it's going to be on the internet for the world to see, could be maybe intimidating. And it took a lot of courage for you guys to come up here and be transparent with us today. But man, I'm so grateful that you did, and I'm so honored to serve Christ alongside you. You guys are amazing. Would you guys thank them for doing this? So I want to round out my part of our time in the service by doing this. I want to pray, and I'm going to specifically pray for the things that they mentioned, and I'm going to pray for anybody who may find themselves in the middle of a mental health struggle. And what I would like you to do is, between you and God in your seat, pray with me. Maybe you have somebody, maybe it's you, or maybe it's somebody you know. And if it's not you or somebody you know, maybe it's somebody on the stage. But I want you to take some time and just pray with me. And we're gonna kind of close this part out with prayer. So let's pray together as a church family.